Hi, I'm Helen Evans. This is my husband, Peter. Together we wrote a book called Get Serious. It's a critique on current culture.
And one of the reasons that we need to get serious is because of what's happening to the land of the free. Well, folks, we're being invaded. And it's not terrorists sneaking across our border, although that's probably happening too. We're being invaded in every corner of our country by our own government. And this is not just about the latest election. This invasion by government has been happening for many years through many administrations. Once upon a time, this was the land of the free, and the government knew its place. It knew that its job was to protect our lives and liberties and get out of the way of our pursuit of happiness. Now, it's turning into the land of the state. The government is telling us how to live our lives. If you don't believe it, consider the fate of our first freedom, free speech. Some of what used to be free speech is now hate speech. If somebody feels offended by what you say, you could land in jail. It hasn't quite got that far in this country yet. You might just be forced to take a sensitivity training class. Isn't that like jail? In more progressive countries, like our neighbor to the north, Canada, people are actually being fined and put in prison. And that's going to come here too, unless we turn it around. Remember private property? Hang on to it if you can. If the government feels like getting more tax revenue from your property, it can take it away from you and turn it over to a developer to build a mall or condos. Even the Supreme Court has signed off on this. Let's talk about education. For decades, it's been compulsory to send our kids to free, government-run schools. But what are they learning there? Are they learning what made this the greatest nation in human history? Not anymore. They're learning to put condoms on cucumbers. They're being taught to scoff at the traditions that made this country great. They're being taught to distrust their parents' old-fashioned morality. Our government schools are costing us more and more every year, but they're producing students who score lower and lower in academic achievement. Academically, the U.S. used to regularly be in the top 5 in the world, but now we're down around 20th. What we're really learning from our government schools is that you don't get what you pay for. How about healthcare? Do we really want the government taking over the healthcare delivery system of this country? We don't even need to wonder what this would look like. We can look north of the border in Canada, across the Atlantic in Europe, and what we see is people waiting in state-managed lineups for weeks and months instead of receiving the treatment they need when they need it. People are literally dying in waiting lines. If you want to imagine something, try this. Imagine the DMV or the post office deciding when, where, if you'll receive medical treatment. Not a pretty picture. But the geniuses who brought us affordable housing and the financial mess that caused are now trying to sell us on the idea of affordable health care. Folks, we can't afford affordable health care. Having that much government would literally be life-threatening. So how on earth did we get ourselves into this situation?
Well, Peter, there are some bad actors out there, and they're pushing their agenda for more government control over our lives. There are also some good people who are truly mistaken, and they're trying to give government more control. It really doesn't matter what their motive is. They can't get away with it unless we let them. We have let them. Now, I hear most of you saying, nope, it wasn't me, but I'd like you to think harder. You're probably a good, thoughtful person. You want to do the right thing. You may even say, we have to be compassionate. We have to be tolerant. Who am I to judge? There's absolutely nothing wrong with being compassionate and tolerant. In fact, we encourage it. But there is something wrong when compassion and tolerance is distorted. Have you noticed that the very same people who tell you to be tolerant are aren't tolerant of any idea except their own? So what's going on? Well, what's happening is we're being told through TV and the movies and the culture in general, shut up and agree. Because if we don't, then we aren't tolerant. We aren't open-minded. We aren't compassionate. Instead, we must be fundamentalists or bigots or any number of terrible things. By allowing ourselves to be intimidated this way, good people have left their rights and their freedoms be taken away bit by bit. We think it all started about 40 or 50 years ago. Remember that generation? It was the 60s. If you don't remember it, you've certainly heard about it. There was a so-called revolution, a rebellion against the establishment that broke all the old rules in the name of liberation. It was supposed to bring about a new world of peace, love, and harmony. Well, what happened, though, was that the old rules were thrown out the window. In came in free love and freedom from responsibility. The mantra was, do your own thing. The new moral code was, if it feels good, do it. That mentality stayed with us, and some of the revolutionaries from that period have infiltrated the establishment. Now they're the professors in our universities and the executives in our media. They're still trying to show us the way. But let's back up a moment here. Along with this free love stuff was a lot of good stuff about civil rights. People started to wake up and realize we had to make some changes to really finally become the land of the free. However, when we saw there was too much of that bad discrimination around racial lines, we also threw away the good discrimination that tells us the difference between right and wrong. The pendulum swung too far in the other direction. In other words, what we did was throw away the baby with the bathwater. Now, okay. So we had a culture change, and here's where we have to get very serious about this. What happens when the culture changes is that politics follow. In a democracy, which we are sort of, people start voting in new leaders who reflect that new culture. New leaders make new laws. That new culture becomes law. Roe versus Wade, for example. Along the way toward the sexual liberation, we had to throw away a lot of the Christian values on which this land was founded. Now relax, we're not here to convert you. But we are here to let you know that even if you never step foot in a church, you will want to live in a nation based on Judeo-Christian values. These values worked very well for this nation for a very long time. You see, when you throw away those values, you're left with a moral vacuum that will be filled. As much as some people say they don't judge, or there's no real right and wrong, they're lying. Everyone has a set of values that they live by. And if it doesn't come from a higher power, it's going to come from a lower power. And that power right now is a culture, and the state supports that culture. So it's up to us. We can either try to keep a system of values that values the human life, or we can accept a system that has the collective as the highest good. A system where the government tries to make you good. Now, I want you to listen to that very carefully. A system where the government tries to make you good. In our current system, which they're trying to make the old system, we had the freedom to be good or not. Just don't hurt anyone else along the way. You will not have that liberty any longer when the state is the highest power. We're seeing disregard for the individual human life creep into our society already. Judges, not doctors, are deciding when to remove life support. We've already talked about some of the other freedoms we're losing right and left. But life is the one without which others don't matter. Do you really want it to come to the point where you're afraid to check into the hospital? It doesn't have to be that way. Peter?